The invitation was cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, and Maren Whitfield had read it 11 times before she ordered her fourth drink. Bryce Coleman and Vanessa Ortiz request the honor of your presence.
Honor.
As if watching her ex-fiancé marry a woman with a smaller waist and a louder laugh was an honor and not a slow bleed. The bar on the ground floor of the Han Group Tower was quiet at this hour, all dark wood and low amber light, the kind of place where powerful men came to drink without being watched, which meant it was exactly the kind of place Maren should not have been sitting in with her blazer unbuttoned and her mascara starting to give up. She worked on the 31st floor. She had never once sat at this bar. But tonight her keycard still worked after hours, and tonight she did not care who saw her. She did not hear him arrive. That was the first thing she would remember later, how a man that large moved like he weighed nothing. Tae-yeol Han did not walk into a room so much as the room rearranged itself around him, conversations dropping half a register, the bartender's spine straightening without being told. He wore charcoal wool that had been cut for his shoulders and nothing else's, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that looked less like relaxation and more like a man who had simply run out of patience for one more piece of fabric. His eyes found her before she found him, dark and unhurried, the kind of attention that made most people in this building want to disappear. Ms. Whitfield. His voice was low, textured, the accent softening certain vowels and sharpening others. You are drinking at my bar in my building outside of business hours. It's a free country, Maren said, and then winced, because that was the whiskey talking, not her. He did not smile.
He rarely did.
But something shifted at the corner of his mouth, some private amusement he was choosing not to share with the room. He sat down beside her without asking, which she had learned in 8 months of working as his private secretary was simply how he operated. Tae-yeol Han did not ask permission to occupy space. He informed the space that it was now his. You have been staring at that piece of paper like it insulted your mother, he said. Maren laughed, short and humorless, and slid the invitation across the bar toward him. He did not pick it up right away. He looked at it the way he looked at contracts before he signed them, cataloging, calculating, and then he read it, and something in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your ex-fiancé, he said. It was not a question. He had access to her file. Of course he did. Every employee close enough to touch his schedule had been bedded down to their dental records, and Maren had always assumed he never actually read any of it. My ex-fiancé, she confirmed. Marrying a woman he met 4 months after he left me. Small wedding. 200 people. Apparently, that is small in his family. And you intend to go? I intend to sit in my apartment eating cereal out of the box and pretending I have the flu. She took another sip. But my mother already RSVP'd for both of us because she still thinks Bryce and I are going to work it out, and if I do not show up, she will drive 4 hours to check on me, and if I do show up alone, every person in that room is going to spend the reception deciding how sorry to feel for me. I would rather set myself on fire. Tae-yeol turned his glass slowly on the bar top, one full rotation, his eyes still on her. Then do not go alone. Great plan. I'll just conjure a boyfriend. You have one sitting next to you. Maren stopped with the glass halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to feel unreliable. I'm sorry, what? You heard me. You cannot be serious. I am always serious. It is one of my more exhausting qualities. He finally reached for his own drink, something dark and neat, and took a slow sip before he continued. You will go to this wedding. I will accompany you as whatever you require me to be. Your ex will watch you walk in on the arm of a man he cannot compete with, and you will not have to explain yourself to anyone. You run an empire that half the police commissioners in this city are afraid to look at directly. You cannot just take a Saturday off to play pretend boyfriend at some banker's wedding in Westchester. I can do whatever I want, Ms. Whitfield. That is the entire point of who I am. He said it without arrogance, the way another man might state his height or his blood type, a fact and nothing more. Consider it a professional courtesy. You have kept my calendar functioning without a single error for 8 months. This is a small correction of the universe's balance. Maren studied him, trying to find the trick in it, because there was always a trick with men like him, men who did not offer anything without expecting something larger in return. But his face gave her nothing except that same unreadable patience he wore into every boardroom, every negotiation, every moment she had watched him dismantle another man's confidence with 3 sentences and a silence. "Fine," she said, because the whiskey was louder than her judgment.
Fine.
"You are my fake boyfriend for one wedding, but you have to actually act like it. Hold my hand. Look at me like you like me. I need Bryce to believe it." "I do not fake things poorly," Taeil said, and something about the low certainty in his voice made the back of her neck go warm in a way that had nothing to do with the alcohol. "When I commit to something, Ms. Whitfield, I commit completely." That was the moment everything changed, though she would not understand the size of it until much later, when the wedding was over and the danger had a name, and she could no longer pretend the warmth in her chest was only the whiskey. The next morning, sober and mortified, Maren arrived at the office fully prepared to walk back every word of the previous night. She had rehearsed the apology in the elevator, had it ready before the doors even opened onto the 31st floor. Instead, she found a garment bag draped over her office chair, black and heavy, a note in handwriting so precise it looked engraved rather than written. "Saturday, 10 in the morning. Wear this or wear nothing. Either is acceptable to me, but you will not embarrass yourself trying to find something last minute."
Tea.
Maren stood there with her coffee going cold in her hand and understood, with the sinking clarity of a woman watching a landslide begin, that Taeil Han had never once in his life said something he did not intend to follow through on. By Thursday, the wedding had stopped being the only problem. Maren had worked for the Han Group long enough to know the rhythms of the building, the days when the air felt normal, and the days when it did not. Thursday did not feel normal. Security rotated twice before noon. 2 men she had never seen before stood outside the executive elevator with their hands folded and their eyes moving too much. Taeil canceled 3 meetings without explanation, which he never did, and when she brought him his afternoon coffee, he was standing at the window with his back to her, shoulders set in a line she recognized from every photograph of him that had ever run in a newspaper beside a headline about violence. "Sir? Close the door, Maren." He had never used her first name before. It landed somewhere low in her stomach, a warning and something else she refused to name. "There was an attempt on my life this morning," he said, still facing the window, his voice flat in the specific way that told her the flatness was costing him effort. "A car meant to look like an accident on the West Side Highway. It was not an accident." Maren's hands went cold around the coffee cup. "Are you hurt?"
No.
He finally turned, and she saw it then, a thin line at his temple, barely visible, already cleaned. The men in the other car were not so fortunate. "Who did this?" "A faction that used to answer to me, and no longer wishes to." His eyes moved over her face with an intensity that felt like being catalogued all over again, except this time it did not feel clinical. It felt like he was checking her for damage, like the thought of something happening to her had already occurred to him and displeased him deeply. "You should know, because you sit 20 feet from my office every day, and because you are about to spend a Saturday standing beside me in public. If this escalates before then, I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. You're telling me I could get shot at a wedding. I am telling you that proximity, to me, has never been without cost. I should have told you that before I offered to attend." Maren set the coffee down on his desk, deliberately, and crossed her arms, because she needed something to do with her hands that was not shaking. "You're giving me an out. I am giving you the truth. What you do with it is yours to decide." She thought about walking away. She thought about it seriously, standing in that office with the low winter light coming through the glass and the small dried line of blood he had not quite managed to hide at his hairline. She thought about her ordinary life, her ordinary apartment, the ordinary danger of heartbreak that she had signed up for once and never wanted to repeat. And then she thought about the way he had said do not go alone, like her humiliation was a solvable problem and he intended to solve it personally, and she found that she was not afraid in the way she should have been. "I'm still going Saturday," she said. "And so are you." Something crossed his face that she had never seen there before, something that looked almost like relief, quickly hidden. "Then we will need to discuss security. And you will need to trust me enough to let a man walk 2 steps behind you at all times. His name is Doyoung." He will not speak to you unless it is necessary. Do not mistake his silence for indifference. You really are taking this seriously. I take everything that belongs to me seriously, he said, and then, as if he had heard the word land wrong, added, for the purposes of Saturday. You understand. She did not entirely believe him. She was starting to suspect he did not entirely believe himself. Saturday came gray and cold, the kind of late autumn day that made the Westchester estate look like something out of a period drama, stone and ivy and a receiving line long enough that Marin's feet ached before she had even reached the church doors. The dress Taeyol had sent fit her like it had been built around her exact measurements, which she realized with a lurch of unease it probably had. Deep emerald silk that moved like water and did not apologize for a single curve of her body. She had spent years learning to make herself smaller in rooms like this one. The dress did not let her. Taeyol arrived beside her in black that fit the same way. No ostentation, no logo, nothing that screamed money except the quality no one but the wealthy could ever properly name. He offered his arm at the base of the church steps, and when she took it, his hand came to rest over hers, warm and deliberate, thumb moving once against her knuckles in a gesture so small she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Breathe, he said quietly. You look like you are walking into a courtroom. I feel like I am. Then let us give the jury something to remember. Bryce saw them the moment they crossed the threshold. Marin watched it happen in real time. The way his eyes found her first out of habit and then widened, the way his gaze traveled from her face to the hand resting over hers to the man attached to that hand, and the particular color his face turned when he understood exactly whose company she was keeping. Vanessa, radiant in white lace at the altar rehearsal end of the aisle, followed her fiancé's stare and went very still. You didn't tell me you were seeing someone, Bryce said, catching them near the guest book, his voice pitched for casual and landing somewhere closer to desperate. You didn't ask, Marin said. We weren't really in the habit of talking after you left 3 weeks before our wedding, Bryce. This is Taeyol, she added, because introductions were expected, because the silk of her dress felt like armor, and she intended to use it. Taeyol, this is Bryce. Taeyol extended his hand. Bryce took it, and Marin watched something pass over her ex-fiancé's face when their palms met, some primal recognition of a grip that had held things far heavier than a handshake demanded. Good to meet the man Marin left you for, Taeyol said, pleasant, unhurried, devastating. She didn't leave me for, we weren't, Bryce stammered, and Marin felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in 3 weeks. Congratulations on your wedding, Taeyol continued, as if he had not just detonated a small bomb in the middle of the receiving line. Vanessa looks lovely. I am sure you will both be very happy, for as long as it lasts. He steered Marin toward their table before Bryce could formulate a response, his hand settling at the small of her back with a warmth that seeped through silk and skin both. That was cruel, Marin whispered, biting back a laugh. That was accurate, Taeyol said. I do not deal in cruelty, when the truth will do the same work. The reception unfolded in the estate's ballroom, string quartet giving way to a full band, champagne circulating on silver trays, and Marin found, somewhere between the appetizers and the first toast, that she had stopped performing for the room and started simply existing in it, because the man beside her made existing feel less like something to survive. He pulled out her chair without making a show of it. He remembered, without being told, that she did not eat shellfish, quietly redirecting a passing tray before it reached her plate. When her mother found them at the edge of the dance floor and asked pointed questions about how serious things were, Taeyol answered every single one without hesitation, his hand finding Marin's beneath the table, and something about the ease of the lie made Marin wonder, with a small cold drop in her stomach, exactly how much of it was still a lie. You're good at this, she murmured, once her mother had drifted off satisfied. I told you. I do not fake things poorly. That's not what I asked. He looked at her then, really looked, the band's slow song bleeding into the space between them, and for a moment the careful control that governed every muscle in his face seemed to falter. No, he agreed quietly. It is not what you ask. Neither of them said anything else about it. But he asked her to dance before the band finished the song, and when his hand settled against the small of her back, drawing her close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker underneath it, smoke perhaps, or the ghost of gun oil that no amount of cologne could fully erase, she did not think once about Bryce for the rest of the night. The trouble found them in the parking lot. It was nearly midnight, the reception thinning toward its final hour, when Doyoung appeared at Taeyeol's shoulder with a stillness that meant something was wrong. Maren had learned enough in 8 months to read the shift in the air before anyone explained it to her. Taeyeol's hand tightened at her waist. "We are leaving," he said low, and it was not a suggestion. "What's wrong?" "2 vehicles. Neither belongs to any guest on the registry Doyoung memorized this afternoon. Stay behind me." They moved fast for the side exit, Doyoung ahead scanning the tree line, and Maren's heels caught twice on the gravel before Taeyeol simply lifted her against his side, one arm banding around her ribs, carrying half her weight, without breaking stride. The first shot came from the dark line of oaks bordering the parking court, a sharp crack that sent 300 wedding guests screaming toward the ballroom doors behind them. Taeyeol's body turned in the same instant, folding her against the stone pillar of the estate's side entrance, his chest a wall between her and the tree line, his hand flat and hard against the back of her skull, holding her face into his shoulder. "Do not move," he said against her ear, his voice utterly without panic, which was somehow worse than if he had sounded afraid. "Doyoung." A second gunshot answered him, not from the trees this time, but from Doyoung's position near the cars, and then silence, thick and ringing. "Clear," Doyoung called, breathless. "One down. The second is running." Maren realized she was shaking only when Taeyeol's hand moved from the back of her skull to her jaw, tilting her face up to search it for injury, with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed. "You're the one they're shooting at." "They are shooting at both of us now," he said, and something dark moved behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with the wound at his temple 3 days ago, and everything to do with the fact that a bullet had come within feet of a woman who was on paper, nothing more than his secretary. "This was not supposed to touch you." "Well, it did." Maren pulled back enough to look at him properly, adrenaline making her reckless, making her honest. "So stop looking at me like you're calculating how to apologize for it. Tell me who is doing this." "Later," he said. "Not here." The ride back into the city was silent except for the low crackle of Doyoung's radio and the occasional glance Taeyeol cut toward her, checking, always checking, as if she might unravel in the space of a red light. Maren did not unravel. She sat with her ruined heels in her lap and her pulse finally slowing and understood, with a clarity that frightened her more than the gunfire had, that she was not sorry she had come. He told her everything 2 nights later, in the dim quiet of his penthouse, a place she had never been invited into before that night. The faction responsible called themselves the Beck Line, once loyal soldiers under his late father, men who had watched Taeyeol consolidate power at 26 and never forgiven him for skipping the cue they believed they were owed. Years of quiet resentment had curdled into open rebellion the moment his enemies smelled weakness, and a woman standing beside him in public, unguarded and unclaimed by the organization's usual protections, had looked like exactly the weakness they were waiting for. "There was a woman once," he said, staring into a glass of scotch he had not touched, the confession coming low and unpracticed, like a language he rarely spoke. "Before you started working for me. Her name was Yoonhee. She ran logistics for the Western Docks. She was engaged to my second-in-command. The Beck Line took her to send me a message about what happens to the people close to men like me. I found her 3 days later." He stopped there, his jaw working, and did not finish the sentence, and Maren did not make him. "I promised myself after that I would not let anyone close enough to be used against me again," he continued. "It made running an empire simpler. It made everything simpler." He looked at her then, and the control in his face had gone thin, worn through in a way she had never once seen in 8 months of watching him command rooms full of men twice his age. "And then you sat down at my bar with a wedding invitation and a 4th whiskey, and I forgot, for the first time in 5 years, why I made that promise at all."
Phil.
His name in her mouth without the surname attached felt like crossing something. "You should be terrified of me," he said. Every rational part of you should be walking out that door right now. I've watched you run that company for 8 months, Marin said. I've seen exactly what you are. I'm not confused about it. I just don't think that's all you are. She stepped closer, close enough to see the fine tension along his jaw, the muscle jumping there when she reached up and set her palm flat against his chest, over the place where his heart was beating faster than his composure would ever admit to. You didn't have to tell me about Yoon-hee. You could have left me thinking you were just cold. Why tell me the truth? Because I am done pretending with you, he said, and his hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his chest, pressing it there like he needed proof she was real. I told myself the wedding was a professional courtesy. I told myself the shooting was a security failure I would correct, and nothing more. I've been telling myself a great many lies, Marin, and I find I am tired of the effort. She was the one who closed the distance, not him, some part of her recognizing that a man who had spent 5 years refusing to want anything would never take that step first, not even now, not even with his hand shaking almost imperceptibly against hers. When their mouths met, it was not gentle. It was the release of something that had been building since a bar stool, and a whiskey glass, and a hand offered without being asked, and he made a low sound against her lips that she felt more than heard, his other arm banding around her waist, and pulling her flesh against him like the distance between them had personally offended him. This does not fix the danger, he said against her mouth, when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing like they had run a mile. The Beck line will not stop, because I have decided to stop lying to myself. I didn't ask you to fix it, Marin said. I asked you to stop pretending. That's different. He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded moving behind his eyes, and then he kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate, the kind of kiss that felt like a claim being staked rather than a question being asked. The Beckline's next move came 4 days later, and it was not subtle. Marin was leaving the building at 7 in the evening, her badge already in hand, when a black sedan pulled to the curb too fast and too close, and a man she had never seen stepped out with a gun held low against his leg, unhurried, like he had done this before and expected no interruption. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, and the sound of her own name in a stranger's mouth sent ice through her veins. "You're going to come with me. Quietly, and no one else needs to be hurt tonight." Every instinct told her to freeze. She did not. 8 months of watching Taeyol dismantle men with nothing but timing and composure had taught her something she had not realized she was learning until this exact moment. She let her badge slip from her fingers, a small clatter of distraction on the concrete, and when the man's eyes flicked down for half a second, she drove her knee into the hand holding the gun and screamed with everything her lungs had, the sound bouncing off the tower's glass face loud enough to bring building security through the revolving doors before the man had even recovered his grip. Doyoung reached her 30 seconds later, weapon already drawn, and the would-be kidnapper made the calculation every rational man makes when outnumbered and disarmed, sprinting for the sedan and leaving rubber on the pavement as he fled. Marin stood there shaking, her palms scraped raw from where she had caught herself against the concrete, and understood with sudden furious clarity that she was done being a target in a war she had not started. Taeyol arrived within 11 minutes, having broken every reasonable speed limit in the city, and the look on his face when he saw the scrapes on her hands was the closest she had ever seen him come to losing control entirely. He did not touch her wounds. He simply pulled her hard against his chest and held her there, one hand fisted in the back of her jacket, his breathing ragged in a way she had never once heard from him. "I am ending this tonight," he said into her hair, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and final that made even Doyoung take half a step back. "I have been patient with the Beck line out of respect for men who served my father. That respect is now void." "Taeyol, wait." Marin pulled back enough to look at him, her hands coming up to frame his face, forcing his eyes to hers instead of whatever violence he was already planning behind them. "If you go in there alone and furious, you're doing exactly what they want. You'll be reckless. Let me help you plan this properly. This is not your fight. It became my fight the second a man put a gun near me and said my name like he owned it." Marin snapped, adrenaline sharpening her voice into something hard. "I am not asking your permission. I am telling you, I am not sitting in an apartment while you go get yourself killed being noble about it. Something in his face shifted, respect threading through the fury, and for the first time, she watched him actually consider her as a strategist rather than someone to be protected at all costs. "Tell me what you're thinking." She had spent 8 months organizing his calendar, his contacts, the small architecture of trust and access that kept his empire functioning without him having to think about the mechanics of it. She knew, better than almost anyone in the building, which of the Beck line's remaining contacts still filtered communications through channels she managed. It took her 40 minutes at his desk, Doyoung and 2 other lieutenants gathered around her, to trace the location where the Beck faction's remaining leadership was meeting that night, a warehouse near the old shipping terminals that Taeyul's own organization had once controlled before ceding it in a peace agreement, now clearly abandoned. "You're not going without me," Marin said, when the plan was laid out and Taeyul moved to leave. "Absolutely not. I'm the one who found the meeting location. I know the communication patterns better than any of your lieutenants because I've been managing them for 8 months without you even asking how. You need someone in the van who can read their radio chatter in real time, and none of your men speak the specific vendor code they've been using because I set that code up myself as a decoy channel 2 years before you hired me." She held his gaze, steady, unflinching, the fear still sitting cold in her stomach, but no longer louder than her resolve. "I am not asking to hold a gun, Taeyul. I am telling you I have a skill this operation needs, and leaving me behind because you're frightened for me is not strategy. It's fear wearing strategy's clothes." He studied her for a long moment, something proud and pained warring behind his eyes, and then he nodded once, sharp and final. "You stay in the van. You do not leave it under any circumstance. If Doyoung tells you to run, you run, and you do not look back to see what happened to me. Say you understand." "I understand," she said, which was not quite the same as agreeing. The warehouse sat dark against the river at 11 that night, and Marin sat in the surveillance van with headphones clamped over her ears, decoding the Beck line's radio traffic in real time, while Taeyul and 6 of his men moved through the shadows toward the loading dock. She caught the ambush before it happened, a second team of Beck soldiers positioned on the warehouse's east catwalk that none of the ground reconnaissance had spotted, and her voice cracked into Doyoung's earpiece, with less than 10 seconds to spare. "East catwalk, above the loading door, at least 3 shooters. They're waiting for you to clear the main floor." The warning bought exactly enough time. Doyoung's team scattered from the expected formation a half-second before gunfire raked across the space where they had been standing, and in the chaos that followed, Taeyul moved through the warehouse floor with the same terrible precision she had watched him bring to every negotiation, cold and economical, no wasted motion, ending threats with the same efficiency he ended board meetings. Marin watched it unfold in fragments through the van's monitors, her heart in her throat, until the gunfire thinned and finally stopped, and Doyoung's voice crackled through, breathless but steady.
"Clear.
Beck leadership neutralized or in custody. Boss is uninjured." Marin was out of the van before the sentence fully registered, sprinting across the wet concrete toward the warehouse entrance despite every instruction she had been given, and Taeyul met her halfway, both of them colliding in the cold night air with a force that nearly knocked her off her feet. He was breathing hard, a fine spray of someone else's blood across his collar that she chose not to look at too closely, and his hands framed her face with a desperation that had nothing left of the careful control he wore into every boardroom. "You were supposed to stay in the van. You were supposed to survive without me having to watch," Marin shot back, and then his mouth was on hers, hard and grateful and shaking, and she understood, kissing him back in the wreckage of a war she had helped end, that whatever this was between them had stopped being pretend somewhere around a bar stool and a wedding invitation weeks ago. The city's underworld reorganized quickly in the days that followed, the Beck line's remaining loyalists absorbing back into Taeyul's structure or scattering to organizations too small to matter, and the papers that occasionally speculated about violence near the old shipping terminals never connected it to a wedding in Westchester or a woman who worked on the 31st floor of a glass tower downtown. Marin went back to her desk outside his office within a week, and if the building staff noticed that the boss no longer bothered pretending he did not watch her walk in every morning, no one said anything about it, because no one in that building had ever been foolish enough to comment on what belonged to Taeyul Han. Bryce sent a single awkward text 3 weeks after the wedding, something about running into a mutual friend and hearing she was seeing someone serious, and Maren looked at it for exactly 4 seconds before deleting it without a reply, because there was nothing left in her that needed his attention anymore. It was Taeyul who finally said it, 3 months after the whiskey and the wedding invitation, standing at the same window where he had once told her about a car that was not an accident, the city spread gold and glittering below them both. "I have spent 5 years telling every person close to me that I do not do this," he said, not turning from the window, his voice low and unpracticed in the way she had come to recognize as his most honest register. "I do not attach. I do not risk. I calculated the cost of caring about anyone the way I have come to care about you, and by every rational measure, it should have been unacceptable to me." "And yet," Maren said softly, coming to stand beside him, "and yet." He turned to look at her, and there was nothing guarded left in his face, none of the careful architecture he showed the rest of the world. "You are not a liability, Maren Whitfield. You are the first thing in 5 years I have not needed to calculate. I do not know what to call that except the truth." "You could just say it plainly," she said, smiling despite the ache building behind her ribs. "For a man who runs an empire on precise language, you're being remarkably indirect." "I love you," he said, without hesitation, without armor, the words landing in the quiet penthouse air like something finally set down after being carried too long. "I did not intend for it to happen. It happened regardless." Maren reached for his hand, the same hand that had rested over hers on a set of church steps months ago, the same hand that had held a gun steady in a warehouse and pressed flat against the back of her skull to keep her safe from gunfire, and laced her fingers through his without a single ounce of hesitation. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while. I was just waiting to see if you'd catch up." He laughed then, a Real laugh, low and surprised out of him, the sound of a man discovering something in himself he had thought long buried, and outside the window the city kept moving the way it always did, indifferent to the war that had almost taken them both, and the two people standing quietly above it, no longer pretending anything at all. If this story kept you up past your bedtime scrolling for one more chapter, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, so this channel keeps reaching people who need a story like this one. Subscribe if you want more dark, slow burn romance dropping regularly, because there is always another dangerous man and another woman who refuses to run. And drop a comment telling me exactly where your heart rate spiked, because I read every single one, and your stories are the reason this channel exists at all. Until the next one, stay dangerous.